All right, well, good afternoon and welcome to City Bible Forum, or the Forum today. Today we have a special guest speaker. David Murrow is going to be giving us a talk today on the church on trial. Why are people leaving religion behind? David is the author of the book, Why Men Hate Going to Church. Hope you enjoy the talk today, and please send in your questions. And David, thank you for being here. I'm just going to ask you a couple questions if you don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me? Hello, hello, hello.
There we go.
All right.
Hi, David.
Hello.
Hey, good. You have an interesting accent.
Yeah, thanks for getting the crowd ready.
No, we're warming you up. What's an Alaskan accent? Alaska being Hey, Dave, why don't you tell me a little bit about you, where you're from, and then maybe a little bit about your family.
Yeah, well, like you, I'm a Yank, and come from the United States, from Alaska. I'm married. My wife and I are here in Sydney today, enjoying your beautiful city. And I have 3 children. One is in Alaska, one's in California, and one recently moved to Canberra. So that's the other purpose.
Coming to the promised land.
Exactly. We've come to the promised land to kind of check the situation.
Not about Canberra,
out.
maybe, but yeah, there we go. Fantastic.
Yes.
So really intrigued, especially by the title, and I'm sure you're going to talk about this a little bit more, but what kind of got you to the point of even considering this and looking at why men hate going to church?
Well, I'm trained as a sociologist. My degree is in anthropology, and so, but I've been a long-time churchgoer. And when you're trained in anthropology, one of the things they teach you to do is an ethnographic survey. And so one day I was sitting in church bored and kind of did a survey of my church, and I realized, holy cow, like 65% of the people in this room are female, and all the symbols in the room were feminine, and there's a guy in the pulpit, but everything else about the culture of the church was kind of skewed toward that middle-aged woman. And so I thought, well, there must have been a book written about this, and there wasn't. And so I decided to write a book, which has wrecked my life. And here I am in Sydney. But I'm not a pastor, I'm not a professor, I'm not a theologian. I'm just a regular guy in the pews who noticed something and decided to write a book about it. And now I'm traveling all over the world speaking about it.
There you go. All right. Well, we're really glad you're here. His book is available for sale out later, and I'm sure you'll bring that up. But yeah, enjoy yourself, and please send in your questions when you have them. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, Russ, and thank you all for being here today. Yeah, I am from Alaska, and people always want to know, when you're from Alaska, people want to know things like, what's it like in the midnight sun? Or have you ever caught one of those 100-kilo salmon, or any of those sorts of things? Or have you ever been bled to death by a mosquito? Those sorts of things, which is our state bird.
One of these were great, Brian.
But a few years ago, they began to ask me a new question. Do you know what it is? What everybody want to know about Alaska now? Do you know Sarah Palin? Right. Well, as a matter of fact, I do. Here's a copy of Sarah purchasing my book. I actually produced Sarah Palin's very first television commercial. I'm a TV producer by trade, a video producer. I'm not, like I said, I'm not a pastor. I do video work for a living. And I produced Sarah's first ad when she ran for lieutenant governor, and then she came to my book signing and bought a copy of the original version of Why Men Hate Going to Church. And I just wanted to let you know, I don't share her politics. I'm nonpartisan, and just to prove that, I also wanted to let you know I know Barack Obama. Anyway, that joke works even better in the States, by the way. All right, we're going to start you off with a pop quiz. I'm going to put up 2 sets of values, and the question is, which set best characterizes the values of Jesus Christ and his true followers? Now, on the left, we've got competence, power, efficiency, achievement, skills, proving oneself, accomplishment, objects, goal-oriented, success, and competition. On the right, we have love, communication, beauty, relationships, support, help, nurturing, feelings, sharing, relating, and harmony. Now, by show of hands, who believes that the left set is the most accurate representation of the values of Jesus? Nobody? Maybe a half a hand? All right, who's more comfortable with the right set? All right, it's unanimous. Now, I want to congratulate you. You have just answered this question the same way. I've shown this presentation to over 200 groups. Secular, Christian, men, women, doesn't matter. When I show this quiz, everybody always answers it the same way. And then I tell people where these sets of values come from. They're from chapter 2 of the book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. And in that book, Dr. John Gray identifies these as the values that come naturally to a man, whereas these are the values that come naturally to a woman. So you can see in this group and every other group I've ever spoken to, we are much more comfortable thinking of Christ in terms of feminine values. And this is one of the great challenges that we face today, those of us who go to church, is trying to get men into an institution that has a feminine vibe. And let me show you where this comes from. But I'll give you a few quick facts on the gender gap first. And I'm sorry, these statistics are from North America. I do most of my speaking in America. I'm sure in Australia they're very similar. But in North America, the average church draws an adult crowd that's 61% female and 39% male adult attendance. Almost 25% of married church-going women regularly attend alone. We call them Sunday morning widows, spiritually single. She's faithful, he rarely comes. Women are much more likely to attend church, Sunday school, and small groups than men are. Women comprise 2/3 to 3/4 of church volunteers. You know, it's an interesting thing. I was speaking to an Anglican priest one time. I was speaking to a group, and an Anglican priest came up to me after my presentation and said, "David, 100% of my volunteers are female. I do not have a single male volunteer in my church." He says, "Why do you think I wear a robe? I want to fit in." Women buy up to 75% of the Christian products. If you go to a Christian bookstore like the Coorong or something here in Sydney, you will find a little simmering potpourri, a flower arrangement. They're not targeting the blokes. They're targeting, what is it? They're not targeting Bruce, they're targeting Sheila. Is that how it goes? Anyway, that's where they're going. And women out-lead, out-pray, out-disciple, out-witness, out-study, and out-give men. Young single men are practically an endangered species in church today. In North America, the total male population of young single men is about 2%. Now, just a quick trivia question. Among Jesus' disciples, how many were young single men? 11 out of the 12, so we believe. So, a little bit different back in those days than we have today. Fewer than 30% of boys being raised in church today will remain faithful through their teens and 20s. A very high attrition rate among young men. Now, the question I always get is, well, men are just less religious than women. But let's look at the fact. Hinduism, Buddhism, and Judaism experience no similar gender gap. If you go into your average Buddhist temple, your average Jewish synagogue, you're going to find just as many men as women involved. Now, isn't there a religion out there that's wildly popular with men these days? What is it? What is it? Football, right? No. Islam. Muslim men are publicly and unashamedly devoted to their faith. And if you've ever read the Bible, you know there were tons and tons and tons, heaps and heaps and heaps of committed men in the scriptures. The fact is, men are interested in God. 90% of U.S. men believe in God. 5 out of 6 call themselves Christians, but only 1 out of 6 can be found in church on a given Sunday. The fact is, men love God, they're interested in God, they just don't want to go to church. So the big question is, why is this happening? Well, I'm going to save you $20 right here. I have summed up my book for you in 4 main points. Here you go. Number 1, men think that church is for women, weirdos, and wimps. They do. To illustrate this, I'm going to take you to it's a hot summer day. I know we're just coming out of summer here. We're praying for summer in Alaska. It's on the way. But let's say it's one of those hot summer days that you had this summer when it was like 40 degrees. And we're out there on the construction site. It's a Friday afternoon. You got 3 big, burly construction workers, blue-collar guys, and they're talking about their plans for the weekend. And so I'll try my really bad Australian accent here. So, Jacob, what you going to be doing this weekend? Well, I just think I'll spend some time down at the bar and have some beers. How about you? What are you going to be doing? Well, we got tickets to a rugby game. All right. And what are you doing, Phil? Well, I'm going to be going to the men's retreat at church. Now, do you feel the difference there? What are the first 2 guys going to think about that third guy? What a wimp. What a girl, right? Church going is considered unmanly. The second reason men don't go to church is they feel that they don't need church to be a good person. The definition of morality is changing in our culture quickly, and men feel like they can be good apart from church. Christian culture leans increasingly toward the feminine. We're going to have a little bit of fun with that here in a minute, but here's the big reason men don't go to church. It's hard for a man to win at church. Now, you didn't realize church was a competition, did you? Well, ladies, let me tell you something about men. With men, everything is a competition. And if we can't win, we don't want to play. When I was a young man, I briefly took up the game of golf. You've heard of Tiger Woods? I spent most of my time in the woods looking for my ball. I am a terrible golfer, so I did what men do. I quit the game, put my clubs away, and never picked them up again. If a man can't win, he doesn't want to play. And to illustrate this, I've got a competition between two churchgoers. This is Tina versus Tom at church. And now here's our pregame lineup. Our first competitor named Tina, she was raised a Methodist. She became a Christian in 1984. She's very active in all these women's activities at her church, and she loves her women's group. Our other competitor is named Tom. He was raised in the Baptist church, became a Christian back in 1981. He just got back from a mission trip overseas. He's a very active man in his church, and he loves good sermons. Now, what we're going to do is look at 10 key church-going skills, and we're going to keep score. Now, one thing that Christians really love to do is have small groups, and in small groups, we ask people to read. For example, we'll say, Connie, would you look up 1 Corinthians 5:7? And Bill, would you look up Romans 12:6, these verses that you find in the Bible? So here's a picture of Tom and Tina there. They've got their Bibles out. They're looking for these different verses for having their Bible study. Let's zoom in for a close-up here. Tina's doing pretty good. Tom looks like he's lost in the Psalms. Well, here's the fact. Men are diagnosed with reading disorders at 4 times the rate of women. And so if you ask a man and a woman to read aloud in a group, who's going to read better aloud? Generally, the woman will. Ask any school teacher, do the boys read better aloud or do the girls? It's almost always the girls. And that's 1 point for Tina. Small group skill number 2 is this, speaking and expressing ideas. Another thing that churchgoers are expected to do is read the Bible and then express their ideas about it. But the fact is, women outscore men in tests of verbal fluency. So, Tina scores another point. Small group skill number 3 is this, finger dexterity. Now, wait a minute. What has finger dexterity got to do with being in a small group? Anybody know? Anybody know? Yeah, you got to flick through these Bible pages. And are those thick, heavy pages? They're just skinny little onion skin pages, right? So here we go, Tina and Tom, they're looking for a page. Let's zoom in for a close-up here. Tina's almost there. Tom, he's got these fingers here, look like sausages. How is he supposed to find the book of Proverbs with those? Well, the fact is, women outscore men by large margins on tests of finger dexterity. Who's going to get to the passage first, Tina or Tom? Tina will. It's 3-0. Now, before we even go into church, when we walk into a building, one of the first things we have to do is we have to be sociable. We have to socialize. Oh, hello, how are you, right? Who does better at that, men or women? Usually the women do. My wife is a master socializer. And the fact is, women are generally better at polite conversation and small talk than men, and that's 1 more point for Tina. Between services skill number 2 is very important in a lot of churches, and that's called hugging, and let's take a look at that. Now, here's the fact about hugging. Many men are uncomfortable with man-to-man hugging, especially in public and among strangers, right? I don't know if this is true in Australia, right? Right? We have certain ways of hugging, but you know, if a bunch of guys are like hugging each other, we begin to look a little leery-eye at that. Well, that's another point for Tina. Worship skill. Now we're into the worship service, and this is where men really shine. Men are wonderful worshipers because men love to sing, don't we? Men love to sing. In fact, Christians sing more than any other religion on the planet. We are the singingest religion. And so here we are, Tina and Tom, offering their praise to the Lord out of their hymnals. Well, the fact is, many of today's most popular praise songs are what I call the love song to Jesus. The love song to... Any of you go to church? Do we have any churchgoers in the room? All right. Sir, would you come on up here, please, and just be my guinea pig? Come on up here. What's your name?
Alex.
Come on up here, Alex. How are you? Good to see you.
Thank you.
All right, so Alex, do you like to go into sports events or?
No, not really.
No, you don't? What do you like to do? What blokey type things do you like to do?
Not much.
Oh, really? And he goes to church. Okay, are you getting this? Okay. All right. Let's pretend maybe we're at a rugby match, okay?
Yep, never been to one of those. Go on.
Well, neither have I. So let's just pretend we're just watching the match in here, and we're having a good blokey time, you know. And you know, Alex, I appreciate our friendship, and I'd just like to express my love to you using some words I heard in church. Alex, hold me close. Let your love surround me.
Good song.
You are beautiful, my sweet, sweet song. I'm desperate for you. I'm lost without you. Now, these are actual words from a lot of the praise and worship songs that have kind of replaced the hymns in the church. Now, how are you feeling as I'm saying these words to you?
Are you coming on to me?
All right, have a seat. Give him a hand. You know, 50 years ago, we had these really blokey songs. What were they called? Hymns. You remember those? A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing. You know, Alex, you're a mighty guy. You know, you're a bulwark. I don't even know what a bulwark is. It just sounds manly, doesn't it? So, but when a man expresses his love to another man, he doesn't use a love song. He uses the language of respect rather than the language of romance. And unfortunately, a lot of the songs, and they've actually a lot of them have come out of the Hillsong movement right here in Sydney. These are very lovey-dovey. They imagine us having a love affair with God, you know, kind of uncomfortable for a lot of guys. Tina, 6, Tom, nothing. Worship skill number 2 is this, showing emotion. In a lot of our spirit-filled churches, there's an expectation that you're going to show a lot of emotion, you're going to weep, you're going to speak in tongues, you're going to fall down at the altar, these sorts of things. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I guess if you're feeling emotional, that's fine. But there's a problem. Men are taught from childhood not to show emotion in public. I want you to finish this sentence for me. Big boys, they cry. Right. It's not good theology, but it's true. It's how we train our boys up. If a man shows emotion in public, we think worse of him. If a woman shows emotion in public, that's okay. So it's a high hurdle for Tom, and Tina scores another point. Now, here's another really important worship skill, is you got to be able to hold hands. I don't know if the last time you went to church and the pastor said, reach across the aisle and hold hands with your neighbor. You ever done that, right? Well, here's what it looks like. Can I show you why this is problematic? Right? Let's see. Can you come up and do this with me here, please? What's your name?
I'm Andrew.
Hey, Andrew, come on up here. All right? So, Andrew, let's pretend that we've just gone through a church service and we're just finishing up, and the pastor says, all right, everyone reach across the aisles and hold hands with your neighbor while we sing the hymn of unity. Okay? Now, Andrew and I are 2 blokes sitting next to each other, and we're about to hold hands. Are you watching? You got to watch closely what happens. You ready? All right, let's put our hands out there. Did you see that moment of hesitation? I need to tell you something. When a man holds hands with a woman, the man takes the overgrip and the woman takes the undergrip. So when 2 blokes are sitting next to each other, there's that uncomfortable moment where they look each other in the eye and say, okay, who's going to be the girl? Give him a hand. Now here's the fact. Men ain't wild about holding hands with the bloke sitting next to him. I don't need research to tell me that. So at the end of that round, the score is Tina 44, Tom nothing. Worship skill number 4 is this, sitting still. You have to sit still. You guys are doing very well at it. But in church services, sometimes we have to sit still for as long as an hour. Here's Tina doing pretty good. Tom looks like he needs to scratch something. Well, here's the fact. Men have 10 times the testosterone that women do. It makes us fidgety, it makes us wiggly. And who has the highest testosterone of all? Teenage boys, right? They're the hardest ones to find in church. Tina 45, Tom nothing. I can contrast this to Muslims. What do? Do they sit still when they worship? Up, down, up. That's a full body thing. And is it any wonder Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world, especially among men? Worship skill number 5. This is the most important skill of all. We love to preach sermons in the church. Aren't those sermons fascinating? Well, I've got some photographs from an actual sermon here. This is at the 5-minute mark. The sermon has just begun. Everybody's doing pretty well. Now let's look at 10 minutes. Basically okay. 15 minutes. Up. The heads are going down. This gentleman in the back is definitely praying, wouldn't you say? 20 minutes. And 25 minutes. So here's the fact. Men pay closer attention than women, but for shorter periods of time. It's clinically proven. So, final score, Tina 46, Tom nothing. Now, what happened here? This is our post-game wrap-up. This is why Tina wins at church. Church is the ideal environment for verbal, sensitive, and studious people to meet God. Why? Because that's what we do. We verbalize, we study, and we're emotionally sensitive with one another. That's what Sunday morning is all about. And also, volunteer opportunities in the church tend to revolve around traditionally feminine roles. Childcare, teaching, music, cooking, care for the sick, etc. Right? And I'm not being a sexist, I'm just saying for thousands of years women have done these things. And a lot of blokes are not comfortable in these roles. This is why Tom loses at church. Tom loves God but lacks basic church-going skills. His gifts are largely unwanted and unneeded in church. And this is what happens. He gets discouraged, he goes passive, he pulls away, and he loses all contact. So, do men realize why they hate church? Not really. But what they'll do instead of going to church is they'll give you an excuse. They'll say, these are the top 7 church excuses men give. It's boring is number 1. It's irrelevant to my life. They ask for money too much. I'm not ready to change. I don't like preachers. I don't need a church to feel close to God. And here's the big one. There are too many hypocrites. But all these excuses just mean one thing. I feel unwanted and unneeded in church. Because what we find is when a man is able to use his gifts and feels welcome in a church, all these excuses go away. And he finds his place. He feels wanted and needed. The problem is, churches are creating an environment where men feel unwanted and unneeded and unvalued. Now, why does all this matter? You may not even be a churchgoer. So why does this matter? There are some very profound societal impacts when men go to church. And the research is clear. If you want to reform society, the easiest way to do it would be to get men to go to church. Did you know that? Studies have shown that when men attend regular worship services, this is why. This is the bad side of it. Because men are 4 times more likely to commit a crime. In America, 98% of the men on death row who commit the most heinous crimes are men. Men are 5 times more likely to die violently than women. Men are 80% of the suicides. Men are 60% of the addicts. And men are more likely to perpetrate domestic violence. But you put those same men into church, if you want to reform them, church involvement is strongly associated with the following outcomes: less criminal activity, less drug and alcohol abuse, lower divorce rates, less violent behavior, greater volunteerism, and charitable giving. So, as I was saying in the beginning, in that introduction to that section, the quickest way to reform society and to get rid of a lot of society's ills would simply to get guys in the door, get them into church. Studies have shown that that's the quickest way to reform society. And we have more involved fathers and husbands. There was a study done in the University of Chicago that showed that men who are highly involved in evangelical churches were the most reliable fathers. So, I want to equip you with some resources if you're interested in this topic. I have some resources outside the door. I have a few copies of Why Men Hate Going to Church with me. My Australian book partner kind of screwed up my order. I only have how many do I have? 5 or 6? All right. So I've also got some copies of my other books as well, 1 or 2 of those. For some reason, I've got a bunch of copies of What Your Husband Isn't Telling You, which is my recent book about marriage. And women, if you want to know the secrets your husband wishes he could tell you about, if you're married and you want to know what's going on in your husband's head, you can get a copy of that. All the books are $20. I have one other offer. If you enjoyed the presentation, it's only the beginning of a much larger training module that I have. It's a DVD called Why Men Hate Going to Church. I have it available outside. I sell it on my website for $20, but I'll sell it today for $10. To any of you who are interested in taking this home, perhaps you have a friend who goes to church and is wondering why the church isn't growing. Maybe you know somebody whose husband won't go to church, or you have a friend who's a vicar or pastor or priest or whatever, and you say, hey, I saw this crazy guy from Alaska, here's a DVD, and watch what he's doing. Because what we're really doing is we're really drilling down and focusing on the reasons men hate going to church. And what's remarkable is when you make subtle changes to your church culture, the men come flooding in. Because as I said in the beginning, men are interested in God. Men do want to go to church, but they have to find their place. And so that's what the DVD does, is it trains pastors and church leaders, elders, et cetera, in how to make their churches more welcoming to my half of the human race. So that's about all I have for you right now as far as the formal presentation goes.
All right, David, the first question that came relatively quickly. You referred to men being men. Where do you get your definition of being a man? Who gets to define what it means to be a man?
I'm using the biological definition.
Okay, so the biological...
That would be containing a Y chromosome.
Okay, all right. So just being a man.
Right.
Being a man.
That's,
okay,
that's the kind of man I'm referring to, is a person with a Y chromosome.
Okay. You ready for the next one?
Yes.
Here we go. Brevity is beautiful. There we go. All right. Your presentation is really great. However, in my local church, we have the exact opposite issue. Our church leadership and attendance is about 70% male. Interesting. How could this be happening? I feel like the gender roles and all that don't really fit my church as with predominantly university-educated individuals.
Well, is the person who asked this question willing to volunteer to identify yourself? Because I want to ask you a question back.
Yeah, sure.
All right, so you have 70% guys in your church?
Yep.
All right, is your church growing?
Yes.
Okay, that's the other point that I didn't make in my presentation. The presence of men in a church is highly associated with church growth, whereas the absence of men is highly associated with church decline. In the United States, about 3,000 churches close their doors every year, and every one of those churches is about 70% female, because the women stay faithful to the institution to the end, whereas the men are out early. So you having a church with 70% men, I pretty much could have guaranteed, I would have given you even money, that your church was growing, because there's a very high statistical correlation with the presence of men. But I can tell you what, your church will not stay heavily male long, because one of the most attractive things to a Christian woman is a Christian man. And when they see all those blokes in there, volunteering, serving, worshiping, etc., you're not going to be able to keep the women out. They're going to want to come in. Next question. Thank you. Good question.
Where is the motivation to go to church?
Where is the motivation to go to church? Well, I'm just speaking in terms of men wanting to go to church. I'll just go back to my main point. Men go to church when they feel wanted and needed there, when they feel affirmed as who they are, when they feel that they're not being pressed into a mold that is not them. So the most highly involved men are the men who have a skill to give, something to offer. I was speaking to a woman one time whose husband resisted going to church for 10 or 15 years. And he was an IT professional. He worked in computers. And so she goes to her pastor and says, I cannot get my husband to go to church. And he says, the husband says, well, what do you do? Well, he works in IT. And he says, have him come over and meet me for coffee, and we'll talk computers. I love talking computers. Well, then the guy started volunteering in the church office, kind of troubleshooting some of with the networking issues and the computers and stuff like that. Because he finally had something to offer in the church, he felt comfortable, and he was in the church the next week, and now he's become a faithful churchgoer. And his faith is blossoming. Why? Because men don't feel like they want to be freeloaders. Men want to contribute. And as I was saying, most of the volunteer opportunities in the church revolve around traditionally feminine roles, and men feel like they don't have anything to offer.
You talked about other world religions. So why the Christian church over other world religions? Is there any difference, and why is there a value in regards to that?
Well, just my research went into the Christian church because I am a Christian and because ours is the only major world religion that has a gender gap. What's interesting is there are subsets within religions. Theological liberalism, when you become more liberal in your outlook, your church tends to become more feminine. For instance, there are three great strains of Judaism. There's Reform Judaism, which is kind of the liberal wing, way more women than men in that synagogue. Then there's conservative, and then there's Orthodox. Orthodox is the extremely religious, very, very much, you know, the black hats and the long hair and all that stuff. The Orthodox is 50-50 men and women. So theological conservatism is more attractive to men than theological liberalism. So just a little observation there.
Okay. All right. We're doing great. We're clocking along here. I've heard people say that divorce rates are the same amongst Christians and non-Christians, but that there's no difference, that it's the same. So where are you getting your divorce rates from?
That's a myth. That's a myth. When you poll someone and you say, are you a Christian? 80% of Americans will say yes, whether they attend church or not. So they self-identify as Christians. And then the next question is usually, have you ever been divorced? Oftentimes people will divorce before they come to faith in Christ, before they start going to church. So that counts as a Christian divorce. There's actually been a smaller study done by University of Notre Dame where they polled actively involved people who are actively involved in a church, and their divorce rates were much lower than the 50% that we see in the larger population, something like 20%. When they were asking people, are you a practicing Christian? Do you go to church regularly? And have you been divorced since you made your commitment to Christianity? Okay. So yeah, that thing about Christians divorce as much as non-Christians, that's a myth.
Okay, great. If you have other questions, obviously, David, well, we're going to be out there signing books and things like that, and also selling them. But if people have other questions, they can come up if they want to kind of further on, because
that's right.
Keep going with the questions. Yeah. All right, here's one. This one's an impassioned plea or just a passionate one. Why do church services need worship music? I hate worship music. It puts me off church. Why do we need worship music?
Good question. That's a really, I've struggled with that too. I really do. I don't know why Christianity is such a music-oriented religion. Just sharing very personally from my heart right now. I mean, when I'm standing there singing all those songs in church, I'm pretty bored with it as well. I mean, I go to church for a really good laser sermon that hits me in the heart. I really like that. And I loved I love getting around a table with some guys, or guys and gals, and just having a really deep discussion, and then going out and serving. That's what I see as the main draw to Christianity. It's not going to a building and singing songs.
All right.
So,
okay, I'm going to kind of bring just for the sake of time, because it seems like a lot of the questions seem to be coming together.
Okay.
And so I'm just going to kind of try and bring it all together in the sense of what would be a way to make the church more attractive to men? Also, how is it that you could make it more attractive to both men and women? And do you have a success story stemming from using your research?
I have dozens of success stories. And in fact, if you go to my website, churchformen.com, I have a video link. About 2 years ago, I met a female pastor whose church was brimming with men and growing like crazy. It's in the Methodist Church, which is a dying denomination, but her particular church is growing like mad. And her strategy was get the guys involved. And so I was so impressed with her story that I hired a film crew and filmed a documentary about her. And if you go to my website, churchformen.com, and you click on the video link, you can watch this 13-minute video about a female pastor who went out and found and created an environment where her men were excited. And she's got one of the fastest growing churches in United Methodism. So, did that answer the question?
Part of it.
I answered it by way of example.
By way of example.
So what are some of the ways, she went down even to the little things. She had all these banners and quilts and girly stuff on the wall, flowers and ribbons. She took all that down. She created a worship space where men would want to come. She began preaching to the men. She preached on sex, money, power, the stuff we're obsessed with. She started recruiting guys to help her on the church, and they put up big flat screens in the sanctuary, and she projects the sermon notes up there. She just goes for the guys. She goes onto YouTube and finds the funniest videos she can every week and plays those to set up her sermon. So yeah, anybody. What I tell pastors is anybody can do this. You can create an environment where men feel comfortable, and it's often the little things that matter.
Great. I'm just going to, for the sake of time, and last question. So, are churches getting this as far as the message you're trying to communicate? And are they getting it?
They are. They are. I've been doing this for about 7 years now. I've spoken to hundreds of thousands of people around the globe. This book is being used in seminaries to train pastors. The cool thing is we've done a study of churches in North America, and the fastest growing churches in America all have something in common. They're roughly 50% men, and when you walk into them, you can see right away that this is a place where a guy's going to feel comfortable. When a man walks into a space, within 30 seconds, he's made a judgment about that space, whether it's a space for him or a space for someone else. And so everything from the decor, to the languages they use, to the metaphors, to the sermon series, to everything they do, they focus on the guy. Because here's the thing, and I'll close with this.
That's great.
This is David Murrow's ironclad rule of the genders. Women will do masculine, but men will not do feminine. Right? You see a woman on a construction site, she's absolutely comfortable there. Put a tool belt on her, hard hat, fine. You put a man inside of a lady's parlor or a baby shop or a baby shower or something like that, he can't wait to get out. So many times in the church we create this baby shower environment on Sunday morning. It's so warm and nurturing and soft and gentle and all about children and family, and the bloke says, okay, this is obviously a program for my wife. The challenge is, how do we create a program on Sunday that captures the adventurous spirit of a man and says, this is the hill we're going to take? And when you can do that, you get men back into the church.